Throughout history, word-of-mouth storytelling has served as somewhat of a catalyst to confusion with various mysteries and urban legends. Oftentimes, true and factual events can be lost in translation, per se, where actual events and happenings become twisted and molded into something that only somewhat resembles the actual sequence of events that could have taken place, no matter what it may be. Such is the case with one urban legend surrounding a very infamous piece of video game hardware. Over in Calumet City, Illinois, in a once revered arcade by the name of Friar Tuck's Game Room, a machine that housed the classic arcade game, Berzerk, has been widely regarded as completely cursed, selectively killing off players that would come into contact with the game's primary antagonist, being a character by the name of Evil Otto. But was this truly the case? Did this legendary arcade console doom the lives of those that played it? Or was this somewhat of an urban legend that was twisted through time? Tonight, we embark to find out. Welcome to the pilot episode of Console Conspiracies. This is a new series that I'm launching that will primarily focus on video game urban legends and mysteries that have surfaced throughout history. With this series, we'll be covering not only mysteries from the distant past, but also more recent ones from newer video games as well. With that out of the way, it's time to head back in time to the early 1980s to dive into the mystery of the killer arcade game and the curse of Evil Otto. To kick this off, we need to direct our attention over to the town of Calumet City, Illinois. Contrary to its name, it's actually a small suburban town south of Chicago that holds a present-day population of about 30,000 people. Being located in Illinois, the region is no stranger to large snowstorms and bitter winters. Keep this in mind. When heading directly south from the city of Chicago, you'll know that you reached Calumet City due to their renowned smiley-faced towers that the town is mostly known for. These water towers that are painted bright yellow and adorned with two simple smiley faces actually form a point of irony for where we're heading in this mystery. More on that later. A long-running arcade by the name of Friar Tuck's Game Room is where the heart of our urban legend lies, conveniently located just south of the Holy Cross Cemetery in southwest Calumet City. Here, a man by the name of Tom Blankley was its owner, and was so for 22 years. To establish a sort of timeline for when these urban legends began to spread, we have to keep in mind that all of this that we're about to get into took place around 1982, so it's safe to say that the lifespan of Friar Tuck's was in its very early infancy, as it had just opened 2 years prior. This newly budding arcade was adorned in medieval theming with tons of arcade games that also were utilized in the game room's many championship tournaments throughout the years. There was one game out of the bunch though that was met with endless legends and disturbing mysteries conspiring around it, being the Berzerk arcade game itself. Before we get into those though, let's take a look at the video game itself. What is it? Berzerk is a 4-way shooter that was released the same year that Friar Tuck's opened, in 1980. Players take control of a green stick figure representing what the game calls a humanoid, and the gameplay focuses on sending your humanoid through various mazes filled with killer robots that fire lasers at you. Essentially, your goal is to take them out. Players can be killed by either being shot, running into a robot, coming into contact with various electrified walls, or being touched by the game's primary nemesis himself, a bright yellow smiley face by the name of Evil Otto. Ironic. Being contrary to a typical villain from the era, there actually wasn't any way to kill Evil Otto at all. He'd run at half the player's speed once they were killing robots, but as they take them out, he'd become progressively faster and faster. Understandably, this was the source for quite a bit of stress for novice and unsuspecting players. So, what was the deal with this guy? Why was he considered so cursed? Well, as it turns out, Evil Otto has had a profound impact on the lives of 3 players in particular, all of whom played the same machine at this very arcade. 3 guys by the name of Peter Bukowski, Jeff Daly, and Edward Clark Jr. had all met their demise shortly after playing, and all in a short span of about a year or two. Legend has it that Evil Otto was able to kill both Bukowski and Daly in real life, and had a direct influence in the stabbing death of Clark Jr. But was this really the case? Let's head back and take a dive into their stories to find some answers. On the cold Saturday morning of April 3rd, 1982, Peter Bukowski, an 18-year-old of South Holland, Illinois, awoke to overcast and immensely cold temperatures. Having endured one of the harshest winters on record at the time, snow was, without a doubt, blanketing the entire town, and as we could assume, Bukowski was most likely trying to figure out the best way to spend his Saturday. According to a record of events, he spent his day as ordinary as you might expect. He started off by playing video games alone in his room, then headed over to his girlfriend's house that afternoon, then off to a friend's, before closing out the day with a visit to the renowned Friar Tuck's game room that evening. You see, Bukowski seemed like an entirely healthy teenager, and there weren't exactly any warning signs about him physically. He weighed 172 pounds with no pre-existing medical conditions, so it's safe to say that he was pretty healthy. Or so we thought. More on that shortly. Like I said, this was one of the harshest winters on record, and Bukowski's transportation of choice wasn't by car, nor bike, but instead by walking. The entirety of his route, from his house to his girlfriend's, then back home, then to his friends, then to the game room, came out to total at about 4 miles, and if you're unaware, walking long distances through snow is pretty physically taxing on the body. Anyway, Bukowski eventually heads over to Friar Tuck's with Ben Everett, the friend that he was visiting, and along the way, complains about being out of breath and thirsty. The two then proceed to stop at a store along the way to pick up a soda, and after quickly downing it, they were probably back on the road to their destination. Once they arrived, it was clearly evident that Bukowski wasn't well. However, he simply brushed it off as him being tired from his long walks out in the snow all day. Afterwards, he proceeded to jump on Berzerk and played a couple of games in the span of about 25 or so minutes, both with high scores. Once he went forth to play his third game, he placed yet another high score, entered his initials and some high score records at the end, backed away from the machine itself, and dropped. After this, attendants from the arcade rushed to his aid and attempted to administer CPR while ambulance was on their way. Once they picked him up and took him to the hospital, he was announced dead on arrival. As you might have guessed, from this point forward, urban legends and theories began to circulate about his bizarre passing. Many speculated that it was the work of the game's central protagonist, primarily due to the fact that it took the form of a disturbingly simple yellow smiley face. But what really was it? Was it evil Otto that placed a curse on him and caused him to drop dead? Or was it something else? According to medical experts, Peter had a rare heart disease called arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy. Essentially, this is a form of the parent disease, pediatric cardiomyopathy, which causes the heart to replace healthy tissue with fat and scar tissue, and if the body has worked hard enough, can cause sudden death in victims. In Bukowski's case, his condition was at a point to where it presented him with a critical threat. Through his 4-mile trek in the harsh winter snow, which is already physically taxing on healthy individuals, the combination of his unfortunate circumstances resulted in his demise. So, Peter didn't die from a berserk curse, and evil Otto didn't exactly reach out of the screen to kill him in real life. It was all attributed to a very unfortunate underlying heart condition. So, Berzerk isn't cursed, right? Well, you see, like I stated prior, his bizarre death wasn't an isolated incident, as a second man, by the name of Jeff Daly, allegedly passed away there 3 months prior after playing Berzerk as well. As word of Bukowski's death began to spread by word of mouth in the months that followed, a now defunct video game called Video Ace decided to capitalize on the fears surrounding this supposedly killer video game and publish a fake article that outlines the death of Jeff Daly. This 19-year-old from Virginia allegedly suffered a massive heart attack on January 12, 1981, after manning the helm of this video game for hours on end. Legend has it that when he passed, he had accumulated a very strangely ominous high score containing the number of the devil, being 16,660. Interestingly though, Daly didn't exactly end up dying this way, at all. He was actually living in Virginia at the time, many miles away from Firetuck's game room, and in reality wasn't anywhere near a Berzerk machine. He didn't even die on January 12th of that year. It actually happened by car crash on May 29th, nearly an entire year before the Bukowski incident even happened. Furthermore, according to Berzerk champion Grant Theinman, a score of 16,660 is extremely low, even for 80 standards to rack up. He explained, quote, "There's no possible way to play hours on a game of Berzerk on 1/4 and only get 16K. If Evil Otto wasn't a part of the game, then I'd agree." None of the claims by Video Ace carried any sort of weight, and they, fittingly, closed up shop a few months after this publication went out. There was one death, however, that was tied to Berzerk. That being one situation that our victim by the name of Edward Clark Jr. found himself tangled in late one night on March 20th, 1988, nearly 6 years after the passing of Bukowski. Across the street from Firetuck's game room is a mall by the name of River Oaks. Clark was known to hang out there from time to time with his friends, and on the night of March 20th, he left the location to head down to the arcade that was conveniently only a couple blocks away. Upon arriving, he played a few rounds of some other arcade games before jumping on the same exact machine that Bukowski had met his demise with years prior. Interestingly here though, there were a few quarters that were sitting out on the machine, unclaimed. Like most would do, Clark innocently took one and put it into the machine to begin playing. However, once he did that, a troublemaker by the name of Pedro Roberts stepped out from behind some other arcade machines and began claiming that those were actually his, which we later learned was a lie. After a brief altercation between the two, Clark ended up holding his ground, and Roberts claimed that he needed to get off the machine, quote, or else, before he attempted to pick a fight with one of Clark's friends. Allegedly, he then pulled a knife and threatened the group of friends with it before he was promptly kicked out of the arcade and sent home by staff. Fearing for Clark's safety, they forbade him for leaving for 10 minutes as to allow Roberts to get to a far enough distance away to make it home safely and uninterrupted. After stressing not to walk the same direction as Roberts to head back home, Clark ended up ignoring this advice and went the same way anyway. After a short walk of just 1 block through the night, he encountered Pedro Roberts and his group of friends waiting in an alleyway located here, and before he could make a move, was stabbed directly in the chest. With his friends in shock and Roberts fleeing, they wanted to rush him to the hospital. However, Clark immediately declined for some reason, saying that he was okay. This, however, would end up leading to his own death, as he was, in actuality, not okay, and moments later, collapsed before being sped to a nearby hospital where he'd also be pronounced dead on arrival. 2 years later, in May of 1990, Pedro Roberts was eventually tried and convicted for the murder of Edward Clark Jr. However, since he pled in self-defense, he was only sentenced to 11 years, with the potential for parole after only 3. So, with these 3 cases that all happened at the same game room on the infamous Berzerk, the game is surely cursed, right? Well, it seems that that's what people want to think. Throughout recent history, humanity has always fought to find some sort of supernatural connection to video games. This all took place back during a time when gaming was in its very early infancy, and was, far and large, a very new concept to the world. The legend of Polybius was taking place concurrently to all of this, and society was truly led to believe that there was some sort of entity that was possessing video games. It sounds crazy now, but think about it. We always try to find something deeper within new concepts. Fear of the unknown is a very real thing, and I guess a modern parallel to this belief would surround artificial intelligence and how we're bombarded with movies and shows that tell a tale of it taking over the world. With Alexa, Google Home, Siri, and whichever other voice assistant now practically controlling your home these days, this doesn't seem too far-fetched, especially with people that are smart enough to hack into things like this. But I digress. The deaths of Peter Bukowski, Jeff Daly, and Edward Clark Jr. will forever go down in history as being directly or indirectly related to the Berzerk video game. With the circumstances that played out, was it truly cursed? I don't believe so. Like I said, we try to draw connections to pretty much anything, and I truly believe that all of these unfortunate incidents were completely and totally coincidental. Evil Otto isn't out to get you, the physical game machine doesn't suck the life out of you, and there isn't some score that will cause you to drop dead. It's simply a video game that was truly beloved and feared during a time when these things weren't exactly completely understood. And with that, we wrap up the urban legends surrounding the killer video game Berzerk. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this new series that I'm launching, and if you have any other video game related urban legends or mysteries that you'd like me to discuss on a future episode of Console Conspiracies, then absolutely throw it my way. I'd love to check them out. With that being said, thanks once again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. I love you all, and good night.